Good evening from the Pasadena Media Center, and welcome to another edition of Arroyo Live. I'm Joe Carbonetta. Our program is produced by Pasadena Media to help enrich the community through informative and meaningful conversation. Remember, you can share your questions or comments with us anytime at arroyolive@pasadenamedia.org. In July of 2020, NASA and its partner JPL launched the centerpiece of NASA's $2.7 billion mission to Mars, often called the Red Planet because of the rust-tinted, iron-rich dust which now covers it. Evidence suggests it wasn't always that way. In fact, scientists hypothesize at some point early in its development, it may have looked very much the way Earth appears today, a blue planet with oceans of liquid water. Because of this, and the fact that Mars is relatively close to Earth by comparison to other planets in our solar system, scientists want to learn all they can about Mars, especially what kinds of life might have developed there and what caused it to become the red planet we know today. The Mars Perseverance rover and its counterpart, the Mars Ingenuity helicopter, touched down on Mars February 18th, 2021, in a moment that, at least for NASA and JPL scientists, was both exhilarating and heart-stopping, anxiously awaiting as they are sending home, like postcards from the trip of a lifetime. And scientists hope that the information they are gathering will help us to send astronauts to explore things firsthand in the not-so-distant future. Tonight, we talk with some of the people whose passion for science and technology, combined with their strong desire to explore the unknown, is making this incredible dream a reality. Please join me for Arroyo Live. Joining me now is Alan Chen. If you would, please take a moment to tell our viewers at home a little more about yourself.
Well, I grew up on the East Coast and went to MIT and then ended up here at JPL about 18 years ago. And I've been here ever since. I've had the opportunity to work on two Mars landings, the Curiosity landing back in 2012, and then most recently, the landing of Perseverance at Jezero Crater in February.
And all of those must have been very, very exciting.
Exciting and stressful, right? You work for years, right? For Curiosity, I worked for 10 years to get the 7 minutes, that's 7 minutes of terror from the top of the Mars atmosphere to landing on the surface of Mars to go right. And then for Perseverance, I put in another 8 years to get 7 minutes to go right. So 18 years for 14 minutes.
Well, Perseverance and Ingenuity are definitely not the first rovers to land on Mars. But how long has the plan to get rovers onto the red planet been in existence?
Rovers were kind of a new thing for Mars since about the mid 90s with the Pathfinder mission and the little Sojourner rover that kind of rode along with Pathfinder. In many ways, that Sojourner rover was an addition to the mission. The primary mission was about the lander itself, and they added this rover as a technology demonstration. And now we're kind of paying it forward. The rover is the primary mission, and we've got this technology sidekick on the side, Ingenuity, flying around on Mars as well.
It's my understanding that the current Perseverance rover is based in large part, but not completely, on technology from the previous rovers that have gone up there. And part of the reason for doing that is A, it's tested and it works, and B, it saves a lot on the cost. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Perseverance's closest cousin really is Curiosity. And in some cases, we're actually flying the same designs. In many cases, we're flying the same designs, so we didn't have to re-engineer parts of the system. And in a couple of places, we're actually flying some of the spare hardware that was left over from Curiosity, and managed to land on Mars with some new stuff that was based on old designs, some old stuff that was actually built for Curiosity, and a few pieces of new technology that helped us go to a place as dangerous as Jezero.
Well, certainly everything that we see on TV makes it look so easy, but it's certainly not. Can you tell us a little bit about what goes into designing that kind of hardware that once you send it off into space, there's no going back to get it?
Yeah, there are any number of challenges we could talk about associated with landing on Mars. Just as you mentioned, right, there is no AAA or anyone else to call if you get in trouble, if something breaks. The vehicle is on its own. It's got to figure out what to do. and we can only help it a little bit from the ground. But especially when you get to the entry, descent, and landing part, that 7 minutes of terror from hitting the top of the atmosphere to landing, the spacecraft really is all on her own. It takes about 11 and a half minutes, or it took about 11 and a half minutes for radio signals to travel at the speed of light from Mars all the way to Earth at the time we landed. That's how far away Mars is from Earth. So everything we found out had already about what Perseverance was doing had already happened 11 and a half minutes ago. And if we wanted to send a command to Perseverance to try to change something, it would take another 11 and a half minutes for our signals to go from Earth to Mars. If you try thinking about controlling a radio control car or a drone or something like that, with an 11-minute delay from what you see happening to you controlling it, and then another 11 and a half minutes for your controls to get back to it, you can imagine that there's really no way for us to pilot it on the way down. So Perseverance had to land autonomously, and that required doing all sorts of things, reconfiguring itself throughout the atmosphere, surviving great heating as it tears through the atmosphere like a meteor, surviving a supersonic parachute deployment. And that's all before we get down to the part where it's got to figure out where it is, light up engines, and bring the rover down and land it right on its wheels in a safe spot. So all of that had to happen on its own without our intervention.
As an interesting side note, I share your love of technology and curiosity about it, but I recall reading in an article some time ago that the processors that are used on these Mars rovers are actually dated technology by contemporary computer standards, largely because those older chips are ruggedized and tested in these extreme environments. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. The primary processor that flew us through entry, descent, landing, and that's the primary one used during the rover, is a PowerPC 750, 132 megahertz. That's the same processor that was in my wife's freshman year computer. And unfortunately, I am much older than I would like to admit. So these are really old processors in that sense, and don't have a ton of computing power, but they have enough for us to do what we wanted to do. And the key thing really is that these are ruggedized and designed for space, so that the radiation environment in space is much worse than here on Earth. We have our atmosphere and the planet to protect ourselves and our electronics here on the ground on Earth, but in space we don't have that. So to avoid things like the processor resetting when we don't want it to due to radiation and the environment of space, we want to use proven rugged processors out there to make sure that everything goes the way we want to go.
Well, we know that, or at least we have heard, that the overall goal of all of these rovers and all the tests that are being done is to one day put an astronaut on Mars. Of course, that's probably still some time off into the future. In the meantime, we have Perseverance on the ground now. What are some of the things that are hoped or expected that Perseverance is going to tell us?
There are a few kind of major objectives for the mission. One of them, of course, is to prepare for humans eventually exploring Mars. In fact, recently the rover is carrying a system called MOXIE, which is actually an oxygen generator. Mars's atmosphere is about 95% carbon dioxide and 5% other. So doesn't have the oxygen that people would need on Mars. So we're trying to figure out ways that we could possibly live off the land in the future. So what MOXIE does is actually convert some of that carbon dioxide, and we successfully generated oxygen on the surface of Mars not a couple of weeks ago. So that's one thing that we're doing to try to help human future exploration of Mars. But the other part of Perseverance's job is to find samples and prepare them for return to Earth. What we know about Earth and Mars is that they both kind of rode similar histories for the first part of their existence. They're both about 4.5 billion years old. And about 4 billion years ago or so, that's when we can first know that life took hold here on Earth. And we also know from past missions that Mars at the same time, about 4 billion years ago, was habitable as well. It had liquid running water on the surface. It was warm enough. It had conditions that were suitable for life. So the question we're trying to answer was, did life ever take hold on Mars as well? So to answer those kind of questions, right, those kind of big questions, they say that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. We want to see if we can find those signs of past life and bring them home to Earth to take a look at them. So Perseverance is really the first leg, the first runner in our grand relay race to bring pieces of Mars and that evidence of past life back to Earth.
Well, along with being a bit of a buff when it comes to technology and science, I'm also, of course, very interested in science fiction. And with that in mind, I wanted to revisit something you just mentioned a moment or two ago, which was the MOXIE system where you were generating some oxygen. And I just wanted to make mention that I would assume what they're talking about doing, or what you have done in creating oxygen, is with the idea that you would be able to process it and store it in tanks where astronauts could then use it when they walk around on Mars. We're not talking about, as idealistic as it sounds, we're not terraforming the planet and making it breathable so that you and I could stand on Mars and have this conversation right now. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. We're basically looking at two things actually: atmosphere or oxygen for the people, the astronauts to use, like they're walking around and to breathe, but also as an oxidizer for propellant. We want to be able to see if we can do propellant and the oxidizer we need to use it and create that from the atmosphere as Mars. The reaction that we're doing, that takes that carbon dioxide and forms oxygen as well, also forms carbon monoxide, which we can use as a propellant and use that oxygen as an oxidizer. So not only could we breathe the oxygen, we can use it to potentially fly people around and get them off the surface of Mars as well in the future.
When the rover makes a move, I would assume it's calculated as much as possible before it actually completes an action, in order to minimize the potential for something to go wrong with the rover. Is that correct?
That's generally correct, though we're making the rover smarter and smarter with time. We have a new capability on Mars 2020 on the Perseverance rover called Fast Reverse that allows the vehicle itself to take a look at what's around and decide what's hazardous and move on, and avoid things that it might deem hazardous. That way, we don't have to shorten our drives. Generally, we've been driving only in the area that we can see. So the rover stops at night and has taken pictures during the day of where it is. And then we plan the next drive based on what we can see. But with a technology like Fast Reverse that gives the rover really the ability to think while driving, we don't need to pre-scout all that area from the imagery, and it can drive further than we can see now.
Well, some of the rover equipment that has been sent to the planet continues to function even years after it was expected that their missions would come to an end. What is the life expectancy of the Perseverance rover?
The primary mission of the Perseverance rover is supposed to last about one Mars year, a little over one Mars year, which is about 2 Earth years. That being said, right, the technology is very similar to Curiosity. In many cases, the same. And Curiosity, of course, is now, let's see, it's 2021, about almost 9 years into its 2-year mission. So, generally, if things are going well, hopefully that Perseverance will last for a fairly long time.
I guess if I can take a moment to say something tongue in cheek, I suppose it sounds like the taxpayers get more than their money's worth out of this hardware once we launch it into space.
But we hope so. I mean, in general, our goal is to make sure that it absolutely will function throughout the primary mission. And that generally means that in a good day, if things go well, it'll last quite a bit longer than that.
Well, so far we've talked a lot about the hardware that is currently on the planet and what it's doing, but let's take a moment to talk a little bit more about you. How did you get to be where you are with this program?
Let's see, I guess about 18 and a half years ago, I was coming straight out of school after a master's and bachelor's degree at MIT, and I got recruited to come to JPL to work on all sorts of different stuff. But what they really asked me if I was interested in was, trying to find ways to land bigger and bigger things, like the Curiosity rover, which at the time was 5 times bigger than rovers we had landed on Mars before. If we could find a way to land these rovers really where we wanted to go, to not just the flattest, boring places on Mars, but to places as rugged as where we've gone now, to Jezero Crater, a place that has 60 to 80 meter cliffs in the middle of it, that has rocks all over the place, that has sand traps that would trap the rover. Really, we wanted to be able to put the rover where we had the best chance of doing the best science to seek those signs of past life.
We've seen a lot of pictures, especially recently, of what the Marsscape looks like, but it probably does not accurately convey what the terrain is really like. How difficult is it for the rover to move around on Mars?
The question, of course, is always where. We're trying to always drive in the places where the rover is capable of driving and won't get stuck, like we talked about earlier. There's no one to call if you get stuck or you high center the rover or something. There's no tow truck that I'm aware of anywhere nearby that'll come help us. But more than that, it was important to be able to avoid all those areas when landing as well. I mean, you may have seen in the video earlier, we actually captured a lot more imagery on the way down. Before, we had really never taken much in the way of high definition video or really any video. to show what happens during landing. But we really wanted to take people along for the ride to see what it looks like to land on Mars.
Well, I know you just mentioned that what it's like really depends on where you are on Mars, but uh, obviously there isn't any liquid water on the surface, so
Mhm.
that's not a challenge. But would you say that the vast majority of the surface that you're on is soft dirt, or is it more like sand? I'm trying, I guess, to put it into a
Yeah,
context that we could compare it to here on Earth.
that's the exciting part about where we landed is that you pretty much see all of it actually at our landing site. You'll see places with these ripples of sand that are difficult for the rover to drive through. There are places that kind of look like broken up concrete, where we have this rock that's pretty hard sticking up with a little bit amount of dirt on top of it. And there's other places where there are cliffs. Later in the mission, when we get closer to that delta edge, we're going to see those cliffs as we drive up to them. So we see everything that you can see in many cases here on Earth, you can see at the site that we're going to as well. There's just so much variety at that site. Additionally, given that there's not much water and they're on Mars and that the rocks are often shaped by wind, sometimes the rocks that are protruding around themselves get sharp, just like rocks in Antarctica, where it doesn't rain either. You get these really sharp rocks too that we want to avoid landing on or driving on.
Well, the rover being a machine doesn't require sleep like you or I do, but presumably does have some type of a duty cycle. So, how long can the rover operate at any given time?
It depends on what we're doing, right? The rover does kind of sleep at night to recharge its batteries, kind of like we do, I guess. But the power source on Perseverance, much like Curiosity, provides basically 100 watts of power all the time. So we use that at night when the rover is sleeping to charge the battery, so that we can use that power source plus the battery during the day to support operations. So typically a day for the rover can last, depending on what we're trying to do, 6 hours or so, or maybe 8 hours. So it puts in an honest work day like the rest of us.
What are the temperatures like on Mars, and how radical is the swing between day and night?
Yeah, the swing between day and night is pretty different. Even across just different couple of feet off the ground, things can change quite a bit. It can be kind of temperate during the day. It can get as warm as 20 degrees Celsius, which is a pretty nice day here on Earth. But it can get as low as 150 below, which is pretty cold. So you get these huge swings overnight. And that's really tough on the electronics and other parts of the vehicle as well to go through those temperature cycles. Luckily, that power source that we have on board the vehicle actually produces a fair amount of heat that we use to bring in and use a fluid loop, kind of like a circulation system, really, to bring some of that heat into the rover to keep things nice and toasty in kind of the electronic box area.
The rover itself doesn't require any kind of heating to survive these minus 150-degree temperatures.
It will heat things that are kind of out on the outer ends of things, kind of like you carry those little heating packets and put them in your mittens. Things that aren't in the body of the rover have little heaters that'll keep them warm. But the body of the rover has that big thermal source in the back, that power source in the back, that also produces a lot of waste heat, and we bring that in to the body of the rover using that circulation system to keep everything nice and toasty.
Well, we've seen a lot of great things so far, but perhaps we can get a sneak peek from you. What are you expecting to do next with Perseverance?
Well, Perseverance is still in the midst of doing the helicopter flying experiments that we're doing with Ingenuity. Ingenuity's already flown 4 times, and we expect to fly it a few more times before we're done there. But then we'll move on to the main part of the mission, which is to collect those samples that might have the signs of past life and get them ready to bring home to Earth. That's the big piece that we're looking to do next.
I've also read that Perseverance is almost the size of a compact car. Is that correct?
That's true in terms of footprint, but it's actually quite a bit taller. It's basically Shaquille O'Neal size in height. So very tall basketball player in height. That's where the eyes are in some sense, all the way up on the top of the mast. But the footprint is kind of like a compact car.
But certainly not something that anybody could ride around in at the moment.
Well, it's really not designed for people yet, and we don't have the things that people would need to survive on Mars put there yet. So I think you could sit on the rover and move around, but you'd go pretty slow, and you'd need to bring your own oxygen and atmosphere and temperature control and food, things that the rover doesn't need.
Well, I know that we're almost out of time with our interview, but I'm wondering if there are any final thoughts that you'd like to share about the current mission and what's to come.
I'd just like to say again that this has been great, and Perseverance is really the first step in our exploration of Mars and bringing pieces of Mars back home to Earth. I'm excited to finally do that round trip. We've sent things to Mars, but we've never really brought anything back. So I'm excited to begin that round trip mission.
On that note, I do want to squeeze in this one last question because you have mentioned several times that you do hope to bring something back. How soon can we expect to actually see that happen?
We're looking to, it takes a lot of things to bring things back from Mars, right? We're going to take those samples, launch them up into Mars orbit, collect them in Mars orbit, and bring them back to Earth, and then land here. So we're looking to do that in the early 2030s.
So it's still a ways off then.
It's still a ways off, but we're working very hard on it right now.
All right. Well, Alan Chen, thank you so much for your time. It's been a fascinating conversation. We look forward to great things to come. I am always excited to see the latest pictures coming from the rovers, and definitely look forward to the next steps.
Thanks again.
I'm now joined by Justin Koch. Justin, thank you for joining us this evening. How are you tonight?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
If you would take a moment to tell our viewers at home a little more about yourself, please.
Sure. So my name is Justin Koch. I'm a robotics mechanical engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. So I am a engineer there that works on research and development, as well as rover operations and now helicopter operations, now that we have a helicopter on Mars. So I'm very excited to be here tonight to talk about our Ingenuity helicopter and my role as the helicopter integration engineer lead for that. So this has been a very fun project where we've worked on the interface between the helicopter and the rover that's operating on Mars. So we've had a technology demonstration for this helicopter demonstrating powered flight on another planet. So my role is working that interface and actually sending up the commands from the rover to the helicopter to tell it how to do its flights.
Well, before we get into or in depth on the Ingenuity helicopter, I wanted to start out by asking, what was the road that brought you to where you are today working on this project?
Yes, so what originally brought me to Pasadena was I came out here to attend Caltech. So I attended Caltech for my undergraduate in mechanical engineering, and there I had a lot of opportunities to work on robotics and projects at Caltech with the robotics team there. And I ended up doing an internship at JPL over one of the summers, and it was a remarkable experience where I got to see all of the really exciting projects that JPL works on and get involved. And that helped get my foot in the door and get interested in learning more about the opportunities there. And then I ended up working there full time. So I've been at JPL for a number of years working on various systems. And so previously I'd been a rover driver for the Curiosity rover, which has been on Mars for a number of years, and then started to get involved with the Mars 2020 mission as we were gearing up and getting ready to send up this new rover and helicopter as well.
Well, you mentioned that previously you were a rover driver. I wanted to center on that for just a moment because you instantly get images in your mind, I guess, of somebody sitting in front of this virtual steering wheel or something, but it's not like that at all.
That's right. You know, it's less of like driving a car on Earth and much more like playing an elaborate video game is like how I like to describe it. Essentially, we plan out a whole day or more of activities for the rover, and we simulate it on Earth and then get it all ready, and then we send it up. So we use a variety of different tools, including computer simulation to write the actual commands, and then we can visualize how the rover is actually driving. We actually have 3D glasses that we can put on and visualize the terrain so that the rovers take images, left and right eye, and then by putting on our 3D glasses, we can actually see the terrain. So it's extremely helpful to make sure that we're avoiding any areas that the rover would not be safe to drive on. So we plan out the path that we want to drive the rover, and then once we're happy with it and have verified it and ran it through the simulation a few times, and we're good to go, then we will send it up to the rover. And so we're typically planning out while the rover is sleeping its activities for the next day, and then we send those commands up to the rover, and then we go to sleep ourselves, and then we get the downlink back from the rover that sends through the orbiters the information about how the drive went, and then we plan out the next day of activities. So it's a very exciting way, and it's been a very cool project to work on, having worked with scientists from all over the world that help provide inputs onto what samples we want to take or where we want to drive the rover. It's a very collaborative and large team that helps design what we want to do with the rover on Mars.
A moment ago, you referred to it as a very cool project, and I would call that being ultra modest, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, that you have the honor of being a member of the first team to actually have a flying machine on a body outside of Earth.
That's right. So this was with Ingenuity, the very first powered flight on another planet. So in very much a way, this was our Wright brothers moment of demonstrating that we could fly this powered aircraft on another planet. And what's special about this in particular is that Mars has a very thin atmosphere, 1% of Earth's. And so there are a lot of engineering and technical challenges for figuring out how we could even fly on a place like Mars that is so different from Earth.
What are some of the things that are required in order to get an aircraft to fly in that thinner atmosphere? Does the prop have to spin faster? Obviously, there must be a different pitch on the blades. There must be a million variables that have to be accounted for in order to make this work.
That's exactly right. And so, when we were first pitching this idea, it sounded crazy, talking about flying at such a thin atmosphere. But we went to the numbers and we did the math, and we actually were able to demonstrate that it was possible. But of course, it's not just about the numbers. You really need the proof in the testing. And so we are lucky enough to have a vacuum chamber that we demonstrated a proof of concept. So much in the way that engineers always like to build prototypes and test out new ideas, we built a mock-up of what this helicopter might look like. And so some of the things that had to go into it would spinning these blades extremely fast compared to what a normal helicopter spins at. We have extremely light carbon fiber blades that rotate at about 2,400 RPM, and that span of about 4 feet or so from tip to tip. So these are extremely lightweight, large, and very fast blades that help give it its propulsion. We also have to make it very, very light to make sure that it has enough thrust to be able to lift up. So we had to spend a lot of work in the materials and the design to make it as light as possible and really optimize every small bit of mass that goes onto this vehicle to make it possible. But after many prototypes and engineering, we were able to demonstrate that it works, and that set us up to then do the final test, which of course was doing our first flight on Mars.
Well, you mentioned, of course, that the atmosphere on Mars is thinner, and that presumably presents less resistance, but also requires the propellers to spin, or the blades to spin, you said twice as fast as a normal helicopter, which, it stands to reason, requires a lot more power. So how long can Ingenuity remain aloft before it has to set down again because its batteries are drained?
So our original design was relatively short flights, because you're exactly right. We have to make sure that we maintain enough power to put in to spin that fast. But it's also important that we maintain some power so that we can survive the night. Mars is extremely cold, and so we needed to make sure that we had enough power to keep our survival heaters on to make sure that we lasted into the next day. So our flight times, our original goal was achieving 90 seconds, and we demonstrated that across our first flights. But what's extremely exciting is, as we've been doing more and more flights, and we've now done 4 total flights so far on Mars. On our 4th flight, we decided to push it even further to the limit, and we actually achieved just shy of 2 minutes, so 117 seconds of powered flight, which was even further than our original design goal had been. And we were able to demonstrate this longer flight and flying even further than we had originally proposed. So every step is kind of an incremental test of demonstrating the technology and really pushing it to its limits and learning about how it works.
So approximately 2 minutes, though, is about the maximum duration you can safely run before you are in jeopardy of not having enough power. Is that correct?
That's right.
One of the other things that I have been curious about is I've noticed that all of the test flights so far have been several feet, but still within tens of feet off the ground. I would assume that is calculated as well. You guys have run the numbers to determine the probability of surviving a crash, and at that height, you're probably still okay.
That's right. There's a lot of factors that go into how high we fly. One of them being being able to survive a rapid landing, which we do have capabilities that if the helicopter gets into a situation that it really does not like, it will attempt to land. Now, not everywhere that it might be under it is safe, and so that's why we really try to be careful with our flights and make sure we've planned out a safe path as well as a enough time that we're not putting ourselves at risk of landing there. And ultimately, what we want to do is be able to demonstrate that we can do these flights at further distances. And so we're then traveling. We originally started at pretty short of about 10 feet off the ground, and we did actually push our limit up to 15 feet that we've been doing recent flights at. So a little bit higher. This gives us a little bit more distance. But of course, a big trade that we have to make is that the density of the air. As you go higher up, it actually gets a little bit less dense. And so that's why we prefer to stay where we get a little bit more performance. So it's all about finding the sweet spot there. And so far, our flights have progressively going higher up to about 15 feet for our recent flights.
I know you mentioned that nothing gets done on Mars without proof of concept back here on Earth. And it was probably a virtual certainty by the time you were actually loading the craft to be launched into space that it would fly when it got to Mars. Just the same, how exciting was it to see that lift off the ground for the first time?
It was remarkable. I still think about that day, and it, a lot went into it, of course, of all the years of planning into it, but even just preparing that day before of verifying that the flight was safe and doing all the work and getting ready for uplink to send those commands to the rover to then send to the helicopter. And so we came in because, of course, we're not getting live data back. What we have to do is we have to wait for the orbiter pass that sends information back on how the flight did. So the flight had actually happened a little after midnight here in Pasadena. And then we had to wait a couple hours, which are very nerve-wracking, before we got those first bits down. Of course, all of us were there on lab at JPL. As we were getting the data down and nervously hitting the refresh and waiting to hear how it went. And so the data kind of comes down incrementally, where first we saw that everything looked normal, the products that we were expecting came down, and then the big moment, of course, was when, and for those that have seen the live stream, when we showed that plot that we actually saw in the altimeter, that we not only reached the altitude but then safely came back down. That was so exciting. And then, of course, right after that too, we got the pictures from both the rover and the helicopter, so we were able to see the actual helicopter above hovering, and that was really the moment that, of course, we were all just so relieved and celebrating. And of course, there are many COVID restrictions, but we were all doing our elbow bumps, which has become the new trend, in celebrating while maintaining social distance. So it was an absolutely thrilling day. We were just ecstatic.
We have certainly all seen images of what Mars might look like, based on science fiction movies and television programs. But what is the weather actually like when the Ingenuity helicopter is flying? Is it calm? Is it windy? For those of us at home who don't know anything beyond our beaches, what is it like on Mars?
Yeah, so overall, Mars is a very, very cold planet, much colder than Earth. And so we're always balancing, making sure that we fly at warmer times of day. That's when the sun's out, but it's still, hovering around 0 degrees or colder. So, these are, when I say warm, of course, it's all relative on Mars. But we typically try to pick our flight times when we had the best solar power. So when we had the sun giving us the most energy, to make sure that we can keep maintaining the batteries, as well as the winds that you mentioned. That's also a very important aspect of it. And so we actually used our weather station that we just so happen to have on the rover called META, and that gives us information about the winds. And so by kind of keeping an eye on how the winds were performing, we actually did a assessment and picked that time where we flew, which was right around 12:30, and that's local Mars time. to pick our flight time such that the winds were the calmest. Now, that being said, with the slightly thinner atmosphere at 1%, the actual force, the breeze that you feel from the winds is less than it would be on Earth, of course. And so by picking that balance, we're able to pick a time that was the safest to fly the helicopter. So those were some of the things that we were thinking about, and absolutely the weather was something that we had to think very carefully about and make sure that we picked the time that was safest for the helicopter.
But it does not fly in absolutely calm conditions then. There actually is some type of a breeze up there on Mars.
That's right. So there's always a little bit of a, even with being the last atmosphere, there's always a slight weather. And actually you can see it on some of the videos that we've released, where as the helicopter, the wind is being pushed down, you can actually see a little bit of dust kicking up and actually going with the wind. So that was a very cool moment where we were actually able to see the winds. And in the data that we've gotten down, and much of it has been released, you can actually see the helicopter having to correct a little bit to fight against the wind. So it uses a downward facing camera that tracks its position to make sure it's staying where we want it to.
Well, would you talk us through a typical day with the Ingenuity helicopter and this project?
Sure. So we work very closely between the Ingenuity team and the rover team to coordinate those activities. So typically we work when we're on Mars time while the rover was sleeping. So the rover is asleep on Mars, it's in the nighttime there. And on Earth, us humans are planning out the activities for the day. So we spend time basically planning out, simulating, and developing what we want to do. For the helicopter, we can choose a couple different days. We could make sure that we keep communication and download files off the helicopter, but we can also, of course, do the flights. And so we would do all the simulation and planning. And then at that point, when we're happy with the product and the flight plan and ready to go, we then send it on the Deep Space Network on Earth to the rover, which the rover wakes up in the early Mars mornings, downloads the data, and then basically executes the plan. You can think of it kind of like a checklist that we send to the rover, where we tell it, make sure to do all these activities in this order. And from there, that's where the rover then communicates to the helicopter, downloads the data to the helicopter, and then the helicopter receives its plan and checklist. And if it's a flight day, that's when it knows how to do its flight. And then, of course, the same way, the data comes down off the helicopter, back to the rover, up to the orbiters, which then send it back to Earth. And then us on Earth, we wake up, download the data, do our assessment, and then plan up the next day. So it's kind of a daily cadence.
Speaking of flights, there have been 4 so far, as you mentioned, but number 4 proved a bit more problematic. And as I have read, based on the simulations that were conducted prior to launch, it was revealed that there was about a 15% likelihood that there would be a problem on any given launch attempt. Is that correct?
Yeah, and what you're referring to there is we noticed a bug that has been discussed and we've published about that's related to the safety mechanism on the helicopter. And so what it's doing is it's assessing if it's safe to fly. Now we've come up with our fix with it, and we use a mode, and that was actually why it took us a few extra days to get to the first flight. But it's a little bit probabilistic, meaning that 85% of the time the helicopter will take off, but 15% of the time it says, nope, it's not safe. I'm not doing this flight. And so then we just have to wait till the next day to tell it again. And that's exactly what happened on our 4th flight. Is it woke up and said it wasn't safe. And so then the next day we just proceeded to tell it again that it's safe and it should continue on its flight. And yes, on the second attempt, it was very successful. It took off. But we like to keep things safe, and we're excited that it always ends in a way that it remains on the ground and stable.
Definitely a good thing. So what is next for Ingenuity?
So what's next is coming up soon. We have flight number 5, which we will be attempting soon. Again, continuing to push the limits. And NASA actually recently announced a extension of our 30 Sol technology demonstration window. So originally this was a short window to show the success of the technology and the capabilities that it is actually possible to fly on Mars. For these upcoming flights, we're going to extend it at least another 30 sols and demonstrate even more progressive abilities for this time a operational demonstration. So we're going to be demonstrating how a helicopter might support future rover missions, scouting out ahead, taking images, and then helping the rover pick where it wants to drive. So we're taking images with the downward-facing camera and the forward-facing color photo lens on the camera of the helicopter to assess places ahead of time before the rover even travels there, and then get that data back to assess. So we've got a lot of very exciting flights coming up, pushing the boundaries and proving this technology both for our current mission as well as future missions that NASA might send that encompass even more helicopters and rovers and coordinated activities. So it's a very exciting time for demonstrating new technologies on Mars.
Well, Justin, it all sounds amazing, and we look forward to seeing everything that Ingenuity and Perseverance can do. And we thank you very much for your time this evening. It's been a most enjoyable conversation, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. And we are always very excited to have everyone following online. And you can, of course, go to NASA or JPL, our websites, and look at the pictures or the images or videos of our flights.
Joining me now is Dr. Randy Wesson, and I know you prefer to just be addressed as Randy. So Randy, how are you this evening? And thank you for joining us.
I'm very well. Thank you very much.
It is a pleasure to have you here. Of course, I would like to ask you to please take a minute or two to tell our viewers at home a little bit more about yourself.
Well, let's see. I've been at JPL for over 38 years, and I've worked on everything from Voyager, Galileo, Cassini, Mars programs, telecommunications, Cassini, search for Earth-like planets around star systems, and now I do early formulation, the brainstorming concepts. I went to 21st grade, so I have a bachelor's in physics and astronomy, a master's in aeronautical engineering, and a PhD in operational research. Co-authored a couple of books, and I've got an asteroid named after me, as a few things.
Just out of curiosity, do you ever sleep?
Yeah, I like sleep. Sleep's kind of good. Kind of do it when it's dark.
It certainly sounds like you have been very, very busy, and I'm sure the most recent Mars project is no exception to that.
Well, I'm not directly on the Perseverance or Ingenuity team, but let's just say I'm a fan of theirs, and their helicopter started with us in the early formulation phases.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about a typical day for you?
A typical day is we have these things that we call studies. They can be a half day, full day, or multiple day long, and somebody comes with a problem. What would you do with a beach ball with eyes on Mars? How would you go through the seas of Enceladus, the subterranean ocean on that moon around Saturn? What would you do if you could go to another star system in 40 years? What would you need to make that viable? And we'll sit around and we brainstorm ideas. So we bring a bunch of subject matter experts, people that are experts in that field. We give them a problem and we say, we want you to come up with as many ideas as you can. We want at least one bad idea out of everybody, and you're not allowed to violate a law of nature. But other than that, it's all open.
So how do you get to this place in your career? What brought you to this point?
Well, one of the problems with myself is I did not want to teach or be a subject matter expert in one particular discipline. So basically, people have to make a choice. Do they go really deep into one particular area and they're really kind of myopic? Or do they want to be a jack of all trades in a lot of different fields? My joke is I can talk to anybody for 5 minutes.
Well, JPL obviously works with a lot of different groups, one of which is Caltech. How do they function with Caltech?
Well, JPL is a division of Caltech. So really what happened back in the 30s and 40s, we were doing rocket tests. And when NASA was created in 58, NASA wanted JPL. Caltech didn't want to give it up. So the deal that was negotiated is that NASA pays Caltech to run JPL. So we are a division of Caltech. We're all considered Caltech employees, but we're paid by NASA. So basically, they're educational and theoretical. We are hands-on, and we do deep space robotic exploration and earth science.
So you work on quite a few different projects for NASA beyond just the Mars rovers.
Oh, yes, sir. You've got 3 major programs. There's Earth Science that does everything from monitoring the Earth and taking critical measurements of how the planet is changing. We have solar system, which is everything from the major planets to minor bodies. And then we have astrophysics, where we're looking outside of our solar system to the next systems.
Well, you mentioned that part of how you came to be where you are is that you didn't want to focus on any one particular thing. But do you have a favorite?
Well, it would probably have to be astronautics, and more specifically, space exploration. I like the idea of going to places where we've never been before. It's really very exciting.
So the Mars project is a source of personal enjoyment for you then?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you do space exploration, especially planetary, there are 4 steps. The first step is you just send a spacecraft there to figure out, what does it look like? How big is it? Does it have a moon? Does it have rings? Phase 2 are your orbital missions, where now you're there for years at a time. So rather than measuring the composition of the atmosphere, you're looking at weather in the atmosphere, things with time. Third is your landers and sample return, which is where we are with Mars. And fourth is human exploration, which is the auspices of the Johnson Space Center, where they deal with humans.
Well, as you mentioned earlier in your explanation of things, you deal in a lot of hypothetical situations. Have you seen anything so far when the hypothesis moves into reality? Has anything surprised you?
I think the biggest surprise is when we're not surprised, because we think we understand what's going on, and we really don't. When I was going in school, the solar system was just a dead, cratered, old system. And now we have active volcanism. We have 5 to 10 worlds, depending how you count them, with liquid water oceans. We got the moon Titan around Saturn, whose crust rotates differently than its core. You've got geysers on Triton. You've got a new surface on Pluto. I mean, there's just so many wild things. And then we get visited by an interstellar object, which is coming from a different star system. It's like, holy cow. There's just a lot of great stuff going on.
So with respect to the Mars program, what are you hoping to see come out of this most recent exploration?
Well, you've got 2 things going on here. You have Perseverance and Ingenuity. Ingenuity is it's a technology demonstration demonstrating that we can do heavier than air flight on another planetary system, in this case Mars. And we've demonstrated that. So I'd love to see, rather than just a technology development 4-pound helicopter, I'd love to see a 60-pound helicopter with instruments. So now that we can do some scientific inquiry in places we could never go before. As for Perseverance, the rover, its main job is to collect core samples, put them in tubes, and then wait for missions number 2 and 3 to collect those samples, bring them back to Earth to see if Mars ever had life on it. Because one fun thing, if Mars had life, even if it's extinct now, you then get to ask a set of questions. Did life start on Earth and then jump to Mars? Or did it start on Mars and jump to Earth? Or did you have 2 Genesis in one solar system, which means life is all over the universe?
Well, going back to the idea for just a moment that at some point you'd like to see a larger helicopter. How feasible is that?
Well, we now know how to fly in the atmosphere of Mars, so we now know all the physics and what it takes. So all you have to do is figure out how to counteract gravity and generate enough lift. So that's either very big props. I mean, we're already going 10 times faster than helicopter props on Earth just to get lift in that 1% atmosphere. If you're more massive, you're going to have to generate more lift.
Okay. So what about projects that you'd like to see beyond Mars?
Well, there are just so many interesting places in the solar system. I'd love to explore the subterranean ocean on either Europa, which is the moon around Jupiter, or in the ocean underneath the surface of Enceladus, which is a moon around Saturn. I'd love to land on Ceres, the asteroid, because it looked like it had old cryovolcanism and ices on it. I'd love to see more of Pluto on the other side, or go to Neptune and its moon Triton to look at the active geysers. And I truly would love to start becoming interstellar, which you can argue the Voyagers have just started getting their antenna wet and doing.
Well, so often we hear arguments about the costs of space exploration, and conceivably one of the arguments is always how practical is the knowledge we get from that? Certainly, you already discussed the potential ramifications of discovering some type of obviously now extinct life on Mars, and the implications of how life got there versus how life got here. But what are some of the practical what's some of the practical knowledge that we bring back with us anytime we go out and explore a foreign body like this?
When we explore world, we do it for three reasons. One, because we're curious and we want to understand about that. Once we understand that world, we can actually improve the Earth. So like if I have laws of how an atmosphere works and I go to Neptune and those laws no longer work, I have to modify those laws and relationships to understand both Neptune and Earth's atmosphere. So we'll understand the Earth better. And then you have all the technology drop-ins. I mean, if you think about anybody that was alive 100 years ago in 1921 versus 2021, we have access to more information, more capability, a higher standard of living. Where does that come from? It comes from research and exploration. I mean, I tell people, look, if I have a deserted island and people can take whatever they want, but they don't learn, they're going to die. If I have another island and I put people that don't have anything but can learn, they're going to go to the stars. Which island do you want to be on?
That's a point well taken. We have heard time and time again that with respect to Mars and the rovers that we're sending up now, this is all leading up to the point where at some point we want to put humans on Mars, astronauts. How realistic, how doable is that?
Well, Wernher von Braun in the early 1960s was asked what it would take to send humans to the moon, and he said the will to do so, which basically means funding. But the moon is only 3.5 days away. The Mars is 11 months. Maybe you can goose it down to 6 months with technology. Then you have to hang out a bunch of months and then 6 months back. There's an evolutionary advantage for being on another world, because if something was going to kill the Earth like an asteroid impact, you're now living on two different surfaces rather than just one. But I believe if you're really going to do this, you have to come up with the economic reason for doing this. I don't want to go to Mars, plant a flag, and then be done for another 50 years. You need to sustain it. And I think right now we're ready to sustain the moon. We're not ready to sustain life on Mars.
So in your estimate, it's a long time away before we'll actually have humans on Mars.
Depends. Elon Musk with SpaceX, he wants to do this by 2025. But what I would like to see done is, if you think of space exploration, that led to weather satellites, communication satellites, not material processing, global positioning satellite systems. Those have all gone commercial. Those are here for good. We always thought material processing would be next, but I really think it's going to be basically human exploration and entertainment. So I think you're going to have hotels in orbit in less than 10 years for the well-heeled. And I believe I can tell my kids will be able to say, quote, I remember looking up at the moon and remembering when it didn't have city lights. That's not that far away.
That's those are some pretty remarkable predictions. I'll certainly look forward to seeing what comes of that. You mentioned a moment ago the advantages of being on more than one planetary surface simultaneously. And of course, you mentioned catastrophes. The one that comes to mind most recently is the COVID virus. And just out of curiosity, has anyone done any experimentation to find out whether COVID can survive in space?
I don't know. I will tell you that as NASA, we talk about hardware and software. We talk about wetware. We don't deal with wetware. We just deal with robotic stuff. So we don't really do life sciences. That's the Johnson Space Center that would really be doing those kind of experiments if they were. But you don't need to take them into space to see if they live. You can put them in a vacuum chamber. You can put them in all sorts of different conditions. We've actually had organisms that actually can survive for a week in a hard vacuum of space. The recent one was tardigrades, those little mud dogs that dry out for 10 years. The Russians bought up a biopan of tardigrades, opened it up to space for 10 days, UV, temperature extremes, closed it up after 10 days, brought it back down, and they all didn't die. So you don't necessarily die in the vacuum of space.
Well, that's actually a rather frightening thought. I was hoping that you would say conclusively, no, COVID cannot survive, but obviously
Well,
something
I'm not an immunologist. I don't know about that particular virus, but typically, if you've got water in you and you're in a vacuum, you're just going to boil off. So to first blush, I don't think it would survive in a vacuum.
Well, totally switching gears to something that sounded theoretical up until only a few years ago and the previous administration. We now have the Space Force.
Yes.
Does JPL or NASA will they have anything to do with the Space Force?
Those are completely different branches. The Space Force is one of the armed forces that's under the Department of Defense. That is a different government agency. We're the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. It doesn't mean that we're not going to talk or that some of the technology they're working on we might like, or some of the technologies they might want. But those are two different agencies. We do the peaceful exploration of space.
Well, a moment ago, you mentioned in one of your responses the privatization of space travel and at some point perhaps space exploration. How does NASA and JPL feel about that?
Oh, we think it's great because what we're trying to do is we're trying to explore cheaply and cost effectively. And I'm not going to correct for real your dollars, but let me give you an example. A Saturn V rocket was $1 million per pound to orbit. Space shuttle was about $100,000 per pound. Deltas and Titans these days are like $10,000 per pound. Elon Musk is doing $5,000 per pound, and he wants to get to $100 per pound. If we can actually get more people going to space cheaper and with reusable rockets, it'll bring the price down so we can do our exploration in a much more cost-effective manner. So we love it.
And they also didn't have any problem with him sending a Tesla into space.
More space garbage. Oh,
yeah, I've often wondered about that. I would assume that it was sent on a trajectory that will at some point carry it out of our solar system. It's not something that we have to worry about running into. It's not orbiting anything. Is that correct?
It is. It did not have escape velocity. So it's orbiting between basically Earth and then out to Mars orbit. And it's going to keep coming around. And at one point, either Mars is going to get in the way or Earth is going to get in the way. But if Earth got in the way, I'm sure Mars too, it's going to burn up. It's not designed to re-enter an atmosphere.
So, but in the meantime, anytime astronauts go up, they actually have to calculate for this Tesla floating around in space. Is that correct?
They could, but the odds are so infinitesimally small. You've got much more debris around Earth that you have to worry about, which is much more critical to humans.
Well, it's amazing how quickly the time goes by, and we've almost come to the close of this interview. I was wondering if you had any closing thoughts that you would like to share with our viewers at home.
As a sentient being, the most important thing we can do is learn. So we got to keep funding that.
I believe those are very, very wise words indeed. Dr. Randy Wesson, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge this evening. It has been a great pleasure speaking with you. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to your further research and exploration.